Hi everyone. For this video, I will be covering task C and D from the ACS, focusing on course development, lesson planning, and evaluation. Also, I want to focus on how they actually guide my decisions as an instructor instead of just going over what these concepts mean. Alright, let's get started. This slide highlights a core idea, which is teaching is not random. Good teaching is structured, intentional, and measurable. When we say teaching is structured, that means the lesson follows an organized flow rather than just jumping from one point to another. When we say it's intentional, that means every part of the lesson has a purpose. I'm not just talking to fill time. I'm choosing what to teach, when to teach it, and how to teach it for a reason. And when we say it is measurable, that means the lesson should produce an outcome that can actually be checked. So at the end, I should be able to tell whether the student met the objective or not. So for me, a lesson should never feel like we just went over some stuff. We should feel like we had a clear goal, we worked toward it, and now we can tell how the student did. That's why I like this structure shown on the slide: preparation, presentation, application, and review. That sequence gives the lesson a beginning, middle, and an end. And it keeps both the instructor and the student on track. Okay. And this slide is about the objectives for task C and D. So after that, I can develop structured lesson plans, apply effective teaching methods, and evaluate the student performance properly. Because the ACS expects you to teach and evaluate at the same time. Great. And same time and same way. And course development. Alright. So this slide explains course development as building a structured learning path. To me, course development means taking the big training goal and organizing it into a sequence that makes sense for the students. Because if training is not structured, students often feel like each lesson is disconnected. And they may practice something one day, then do something different the next day, but never feel a clear sense of progress. That can create frustration and inconsistency. So if I were developing a course, I would make sure lessons are arranged in a logical order, where one lesson supports the next one. Okay. And for example, like I would not want to teach advanced decision making in a situation where the student still lacks the basic control skill or basic understanding underneath it. A well-developed course should help the student feel that training is predictable, organized, and moving somewhere. And that matters, actually, because confidence is often improves when the students understand where they are in the training process and what comes next. Great. I just put this slide to compare syllabus versus lesson plan here. Syllabus is the big picture. It shows the overall training structure, the required stages, and the long-term path. And the lesson plan is much more specific. It focuses on what happens in one lesson, what the objective is, what will be taught, what will be taught, how it will be taught, and how it will be evaluated. So I think of it this way. So the syllabus is the roadmap, and the lesson plan is the actual trip for that day. And for example, the syllabus may show that steep turns are part of a larger stage of training, but the lesson plan is what tells me how I'm gonna teach steep turns today, and what common errors I will watch for, and what standards the student is expected to meet. So as an instructor, I would use the syllabus to stay aligned with the overall training program, and but I would rely on the lesson plan for actual execution. Okay. Right. And this slide introduces the four-step teaching process: preparation, presentation, application, and review. To me, this is one of the most useful frameworks in instruction because it gives every lesson a repeatable structure. Preparation is where I get ready and make sure the lesson fits the student. And presentation is where I teach the material clearly. Application is where the student practices and begins turning knowledge into performance. And review is where I close the loop and correct misunderstandings and check what was actually learned. Well, I like this process because it works for both ground and flight instructions. And it also prevents a very common problem in teaching, which is skipping straight into activity without setting up the lesson properly, or ending the lesson without really checking what the student understood. So if I want my teaching to be consistent, this four-step structure is what I would come back to every time. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Then let's start with the preparation. The first step is preparation. Preparation starts before the lesson begins, actually. For me, the first part of the preparation is knowing the student. That means understanding their current level, how they performed previously, and where their weak points are, and what they are ready for next. Because if I show up without knowing the student's level, I may teach either too high or too low, and I need to adapt to their level, actually. And in both cases, the lesson becomes less effective, right? So I should know my students. And the second part is setting clear objectives. Before the lesson starts, I should already know what I want the student to be able to do by the end. And the third part is organizing materials. That means having references, visual aids, notes, and any other tools ready before the student arrives. To me, this is also a professionalism issue. The student is investing time and money into training, so they deserve prepared instruction. And one thing I would personally like to do is give students helpful material ahead of time whenever possible. If I have a short explanation, visual reference, or training video that helps them come in more ready, that can make the lesson more efficient. So overall, preparation is not just about being organized for myself. It's about setting up the students to learn effectively from the beginning. And the next step is presentation. A good presentation, it should be clear, organized, and logical. And by clear, I mean I should use plain language, of course, and avoid overwhelming the student with too much jargon at once. By organized, I mean the lesson should follow a sequence that makes sense. And each point should build on the previous one, okay? And by logical, I mean I should start simple and then gradually build complexity. So if I were teaching a maneuver, my flow would usually be something like this. So first the objective, then the key steps or content, then common errors, and then the standard from the ACS. And also, if I'm teaching like steep turns, I would not begin with a long technical explanation of load factor, overbanking tendency, and induced drag all at once. Instead, I would begin with the practical picture, So like what the maneuver is, what the student is trying to accomplish, what control inputs they'll need, and what standards they are aiming for. Then as the student becomes more comfortable, I can layer in deeper explanation, like in ground lesson later or at the time too, if they want to know. And yeah, just in my opinion, because the presentation should not be about showing how much the instructor knows, and it should be about making the lesson easy enough for the student to observe and use. And then the third step is application, which is where students actually begin learning through performance. Students do not truly learn just by hearing a good explanation. They learn by doing, repeating, and making corrections. So application is where the student takes what was taught on the ground and tries to use it in action. For example, if I taught steep turns, this is the point where the student actually practices holding bank, managing back pressure, and adjusting power to maintain altitude, right? And at this stage, my role is not just to watch silently. It is to guide the students, let them practice, and help them connect the explanation to the actual feel and timing of the maneuver. And repetition matters here. The student may understand the concept the first time, but control inputs usually do not become natural immediately. So I would give the student repeated opportunities to perform the maneuver until the actions become more confident and more consistent. This is also where decision making starts to matter more. The student is no longer just in repeating words. Now they are judging, adjusting, and learning through experience. Great. The final step is review and evaluation. I think this step is extremely important because this is where the learning loop gets closed. Without review, the lesson can end with misunderstandings still sitting there. For me, review should do three things. First, confirm what the student learned. And second, identify what needs work. And third, set up the next lesson. There are also different ways to approach feedback. One approach is direct feedback, such as your bank was consistent, but you were using altitude through the turn. That kind of feedback is clear and efficient. Another approach is to begin with student reflection, such as like, how do you think that went? And I also like the second approach a lot because it helps the student build judgment and self-assessment, which are very important in aviation, right? Then, after the student reflects, I can guide the discussion and fill in anything they missed. So, to me, review is not just about pointing out mistakes. It's about helping the student understand what happened, why it happened, and what to do differently next time. Great. And this slide shows the main components of a lesson plan. So, objective, content, teaching method or common errors, and evaluation method. The key point here is alignment. If those parts do not match each other, the lesson becomes confusing. For example, if my objective says the student should be able to perform a maneuver to ACS standard, but my teaching content does not really prepare them for that, or my evaluation method measures something different, then the lesson is not well built. So I would want all four parts to align. And the objective tells me what the students need to accomplish, and the content tells me what must be taught. The teaching method tells me how I will deliver it and what common errors I need to anticipate. And the evaluation method tells me how I will verify whether the student reached the goal. So when those four parts line up, the lesson becomes much more focused and effective. Cool. Performance-based objectives. This slide focuses on performance-based objectives, which include behavior, condition, and criteria. This is very important because the ACS is performance-based, not just knowledge-based. So when I write an objective, I should not leave it vague. For example, I would not just say the student will understand steep turns. That sounds fine at first, but it's not specific enough to measure, right? So instead, I would say something like, by the end of this lesson, the student will be able to perform a steep turn in a training aircraft while maintaining an altitude within plus or minus 100 feet, airspeed within plus or minus 10 knots, something like this. So, yeah, that objective which is much better because it answers three questions actually. So first one is behavior. Like, what will the student do? Like, we perform a steep turn, right? And condition is under what circumstances? So in a training aircraft during the lesson. And criteria, what standard must be met? The ACS tolerances, and I think, yeah, this helps both the instructor and the student because it makes expectations very clear from the beginning, right? Cool. This slide introduces different instructional methods such as lecture, discussion, demonstration. I do not think a good instructor should rely on only one method all the time. Each method has its strengths. So lecture is useful for introducing a new concept efficiently. And discussion is valuable because it checks understanding and encourages the student to think rather than just listen. Demonstration is especially important for flight training because many procedural and control skills are learned best by seeing and then doing. So, in actual teaching, I would blend these methods depending on the student and task. And for example, I may begin with a short lecture to introduce a maneuver, move into discussion to check whether the student understands why it works, and then use demonstration before the student tries it. And that usually works better than, staying with just one style, right? Okay. This slide covers instructional aids such as diagrams, simulators, and real aircraft, aircraft itself. The key point here is that the instructional aids do not replace instruction. They support understanding only. For example, a visual aid can make an abstract concept easier to grasp, and simulator can provide a repetition at lower cost and lower risk. And the real aircraft gives the student the actual training environment where all of it comes together. So I would use instructional aids as tools to improve retention and clarity. For instance, if I'm explaining airspace, weather structure, or a maneuver flow, a diagram may help, right? The students see the picture faster than words alone. But I would also remember that the aid is there to support the lesson, not become the lesson by itself. The instructor still has to guide the student through what matters, okay? Cool. Evaluation. Okay. And this slide defines evaluation as measuring performance against a standard. That's an important distinction because evaluation is not just giving a general opinion. It's not simply saying that looked good or that was not good. Real evaluation should be objective, based on observable behavior and tied to standards such as the ACS. If evaluation is based on personal opinion alone, it becomes inconsistent. And once it becomes inconsistent, students are not really sure what standard they are being judged by. So if I'm evaluating a student, I want to compare what I saw to what the standard requires. That makes the process fairer, clearer, and more useful. It also helps the students know exactly what needs to improve on the next attempt, right? Okay. And this slide separates evaluation from critique. Evaluation answers the question: did the student meet the standard? And critique answers the questions like what should the student do next to improve? Well, both are necessary, actually. For example, I might evaluate a steep turn by saying you met the standard for bank control and heading, but altitude control was inconsistent. That is evaluation. And then I might critique it by saying like next time start adding back pressure earlier as the bank develops and monitor your altitude trend sooner rather than waiting until you're already low. Okay, and this is critique. So evaluation tells the student where they are, and the critique helps move them forward. And I think that distinction matters because students need both honesty and direction. Cool. Formative, summative. Oh, okay. So this slide introduces formative and summative evaluation. Well, formative evaluation happens during training. It helps identify problems early, so they can be corrected before they become habits. And summative evaluation happens at the end of the lesson, stage, or training segment. It tells us whether the student is ready to move on. Well, both types are important. If I only evaluate at the end, I miss many chances to guide a student earlier. So, in actual instruction, I would evaluate continuously. Every maneuver, every decision, and every correction tells me something about how the student is progressing. That does not mean I'm constantly criticizing the student. It means I'm constantly observing and adjusting instruction based on what I see. Cool. And this slide explains what good evaluation should look like. So objective, specific, timely, and consistent. So objective means it's based on facts I can observe. Specific means it points to the exact behavior rather than giving a vague impression. And timely means it is given close enough to the performance that the student can still connect the feedback to what happened. And consistent means the same standard is applied every time and to every student. So for example, instead of saying that was not very good landing, but I would say your approach was stable, but your flare started a little late, which caused a firm touchdown. So that version is much more useful, right? Because the student can understand both what went well and what needs improvement. So to me, a good evaluation should reduce confusion, not increase it. Okay. All right. And this slide highlights common evaluation errors such as bias, Hall effect, inconsistency, and overcriticism. These are important because poor evaluation can damage both learning and confidence. So bias happens bias happens when personal feelings influence judgment. And Hall effect happens when one strong performance makes the instructor judge everything too positively, or one weak performance colors the whole lesson too negatively. Inconsistency happens when different standards are applied to different students, or even to the same student at different times. Okay, that's inconsistency. And overcriticism happens when the instructor focuses only on errors and ignores improvement or strengths. So as an instructor, I would want to guard against all of those. I would try to stay anchored to observable performance and policy standard, which is ACS, because bad evaluation does more than create confusion. It can also make students lose trust in the training process. Awesome. So to summarize this section, I think there are three main takeaways. So first, teaching must be structured. That is why the sequence of preparation, presentation, application, and review matters, right? And the second, evaluation must be meaningful. It should be objective, specific, timely, and tied to the standard, not just based on the opinion. And just the third one would be a very common thing. Just the instructor must adapt to the students. So the lesson plan is important, but instruction still has to fit the person in front of you. So in the end, great instruction is not just about transferring knowledge. It is about developing a safe, capable pilot through organized teaching and fair evaluation. And to me, that is really what this section is about. So, so with that, that concludes this section and cover task C and D from the FY ACS. So yeah. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.